Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. This one, okay, so okay, you say, oh well, self-taught, and they'll turn out. And this one, okay, it's selfie in glass, mirrors within mirrors. Okay.
Yeah.
It looks okay. So I'll let me describe it. So when you look at it, it's a confusing image because it's almost monochromatic. So it's mostly whites and blacks and grays, but there's also some green in there because you're photographing through a window or a porch. Mm-hmm. Behind the glass are some what looks like BC, British Columbia, I don't know, trees and shrubs. Could be a raspberry bush, maybe not.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a planter.
Yeah, and you can see part of the reflection of inside of the house, and then you see through, and you see the trees, and you see the water, and the deck with a chair. And it's chaotic. It's chaotic, and the fact that you called it a selfie in glass immediately causes me to look for your face, and I can't really see it. And in a way, I'm not saying that this is a very artistic, in quotes, image because it's abstract or anything, but it is. Yeah, it's great. Like it's so. What does this evoke? I mean, when I look at this, it reminds me of Savory, the island Savory in British Columbia. It kind of a view like that. So where is it? Why? Who? What? When?
Yeah. So honestly, this is one of my favorite photographs that I've ever taken because there's so much depth to it, and there's so much kind of interesting interpretations you can pull out of it. Mm-hmm. So first off, it was taken just kind of at a weekend trip to Point No Point, which is, if you've been in British Columbia, kind of past Souk, mm-hmm. having up the southwest side of the island.
Nice.
And of course, I think kind of a wintertime scene. So you get that feeling of the BC coast. Or people might think of it as Seattle. It's the Pacific Northwest, right? That kind of like gray overcast.
British Columbia.
Yeah, exactly. So, I was just out standing in front of the cabin where I was staying with my family, and kind of just wandering around. And as you correctly surmised, I'm standing and facing the deck, and there's some glass panels, right, mm-hmm. sort of along the railing. And of course, you can see the sliding glass doors and the windows behind that on the other side of the deck. Mm-hmm. And the selfie part, just maybe to pull it out of the image, you can actually make out my ear. I've got this kind of right in the center of the image. I'm wearing actually a kind of a peaked cap. You see, there's that kind of like sort of semi-ovoid structure. Mm-hmm. It looks a little. So that's my hat, and you can see my right ear.
Right.
Or I guess, sorry, it would be my left ear reflected in.
Yeah.
It. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but you know what? Even though you say that, for the listeners, I have to say, it's one of those things that, yeah, you could see it, but it's kind of you would never be able to pick it out.
No, not unless you were told.
Yeah. And it's I like this kind of visual confusion.
Yeah, but the center of the image, that where really you can sort of see everything most clearly, is where my face is, mm-hmm. where the chair and the plants inside the planter.
Right.
Yeah.
Just some of the things that I end up thinking about is that it looks like monochromatic. Like there is some color, but and yet it's all mostly black and white. So has this been kind of filtered? And I'm sorry if I'm getting a little nerdy about it, but like, has this?
That's okay. I think almost all of the images. So I post these things on Instagram, and I almost always do a little bit of sort of filter tweaking, just to just sort of enhance. Nothing too dramatic, but to pull out some of the things that I think make the image more visually appealing or mm-hmm. interesting.
When you grew up, did you grow up? I think you had mentioned earlier, like you mentioned in Ontario, right? Near Orleans?
Yeah, just outside of Ottawa. That's right. So actually, in a little bit in Orleans, but even further out than Orleans, in a village called Cumberland, there's just a couple of thousand people who live there.
Oh wow! So what does your dad? What's your dad like? That you ended up going to neuroscience in Ottawa, outside of Ottawa, and then right now you end up in BC.
Yeah, well, we have this a very, kind of peculiar relationship and peculiar pattern. A lot of my life path kind of recapitulates his. So was very, very like him in a lot of ways, which, sometimes made our relationship difficult and sometimes enhanced it. But, he had a difficult relationship with his dad. He went out west after he graduated and became a monk for just about half a decade. And then he went back and he became a neuropsychologist and actually went on to have quite, late in life to have really quite an extraordinary career in that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it just turned out, the apple didn't fall far from the tree as far as, my interests. I had a lot of similar interests in the brain and consciousness and,
wow,
and how they work.
So I know many people in BC. Okay. So you and I met while I was there for, 4 or 5 months. And, I was really taken by the quality of your expression and thinking. And you're still skateboarding?
Oh, good. Well, if I had the opportunity to, I think I'm at an age where there's a certain very visceral trepidation that that I feel.
Ignore that really trepidation. Just go for it.
Some of my ankles are held together with bits of shoelace now, and so yeah. But I think if I had one and there was a skate park nearby, I would probably be out there fairly often, just early in the morning,
right.
Before the grommets took over.
So okay, right now you're teaching.
Yes.
Okay. Is what you're teaching nonfiction factual information, or is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm in the chemistry department actually at a college. So I came through there on my extremely meandering academic journey, and where I started out in philosophy and the humanities and decided I wanted to do the sciences, which I had never really done in high school. Mm-hmm. So as I was approaching my 30s, just sort of hit the reset button and started from the bottom and right at the very beginning. And I ended up returning to the place where I actually had done the first bit of my undergraduate in the sciences. And I had made a very good connection with some of the instructors there. And I think I had spent enough time tutoring my peers mm-hmm. when I was in the program that they thought I would be a good fit as a teacher. They invited me back later. Yeah.
Oh, wow. From reading Sapolsky, from reading
Robert,
you're right. It is Robert, not Michael?
Yes.
I'm going to call him Jennifer, whatever. Okay. Maybe one reason he didn't want to join me on the podcast was I was calling him Michael. He's like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. Get my name straight. Okay, so let's say there's a thread, and it's a leap. It's a leap, but let's go down that thread or whatever. Right now you're teaching chemistry, right? Mm-hmm. Which for me is like one of the. I mean, biology is a fascinating science, but chemistry to me is a really hard science. Okay, so that thread going down into, say, neuroscience and then going back down to philosophy, how would you connect it? Right? Because just on my side, I have this very broad range of experience, but the thread is always communication, right? Be it scientific communication or whatever, right? So is there a thread that you can draw?
I very, very much so. I think, temperamentally, in terms of my my public self-expression, although inwardly I'm highly inclined to exploring topics which are out on the fringes, if you like. Okay. I really enjoy thinking about and exploring what some people would think are very peculiar ideas.
Okay.
Heading into the science fiction or more speculative kinds of thinking. But publicly speaking, I tend to be much more conservative. And if I'm going to, although I'm not formally titled a professor, if I'm going to profess something, it's going to be something which I consider highly reliable.
Okay.
Highly reliable information, and right. Chemistry is certainly that. So there's that aspect to it, mm-hmm. As a matter of personal psychological temperament. But I think in the background, I have a certain affinity for the idea that, lifting all boats by arriving at a kind of consensus understanding of the nature of reality.
Mm-hmm.
That's just something which I put a tremendous amount of value on.
Oh, wow.
And I like sharing information. So I think, like you, I like communicating. I really like sharing information with people. And I find that personally tremendously rewarding. And so, teaching is a really natural avenue for me.
Well, one of the things that I do in my day job is, I write books and stuff. And so one of the books that I'm writing with my client is on human advancement, right? So this idea that, there are certain people out there who, for whatever reason, push the envelope or push a knowledge or understanding just a little bit, and then raise, all boats sort of style. And so, so in a way, like the guests that I have on the podcast, it would be great if they were like all notables, right? Like famous people and all that stuff. But
Sure.
But I think it's just as interesting and just as revealing to have people in their own little corners. Like you're in Victoria, BC, and yet everybody's kind of lifting their little network upwards and outwards, and for the rest of the world, for all we know, you're coming out with certain ideas and sharing certain ideas that raise people around you to think new ideas, and it's just constantly elevating your network of what people are thinking. I know I'm not making sense at all.
No, I think I follow you exactly. I think I follow you exactly. Well, in fact, I think you're articulating what I would say would be, if I had to choose how my life would go, it would be to do exactly that invisibly. So if I could just, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Wings of Desire by Wim Wenders, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, what the angel does, he just floats into these individuals, because he can sort of telepathically connect with what anybody is thinking around him. And he'll just, if somebody's in a state of distress, will stand by them and put his hand on their shoulder, and their consciousness changes. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they kind of sense that there's a presence there, but sometimes it's just that their thought process changes.
Right.
And then, they take a different direction. There's something that I find so exquisitely beautiful about that idea. Mm-hmm. And to effectively sort of heal or transform what is happening around you in a way in which there's no self-significance whatsoever.
Right. Well, yeah. So here's what's interesting, this banter, right? Like you say something, I process, I think about it, I make connections, I pass it back to you, so we're kind of like shifting back and forth. It's kind of like this funny tide. And in a way, it's kind of like what you're doing is you're just kind of adding a new drift or a new force or a new pressure, so that when you're talking to somebody, it's like when you talk to me, for example, then that leaves me thinking these new ideas. And so I'd never thought of Wings of Desire in that way. But now that you've reminded me of it, and hopefully other people who are listening to this are going to be like, oh, okay. So let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Of the 3 images, 2 of them are photos of a scene or landscape photos. You sent me one, which you call a selfie in glass, with the mirrors and windows, right? So how would you deconstruct or detangle the idea that the selfie you send me is completely not so it's kind of like, actually it just mirrors or echoes what you were saying in terms of, well, I don't necessarily want to impose myself on people, and this very selfie that you send me is kind of like, where's David? It's right. Like, you know what I mean? So
right. Well, there's we could unpack it. I could talk about this particular photograph for half an hour. there's a lot in it. So maybe as a way of entry into it, when I was in my early 20s, I had come across this book about lucid dreaming. I don't know if you've heard of this before.
Sure.
Right. So it's this sort of peculiar hybrid state in which which is very often, it's difficult to achieve and difficult to sustain, but effectively you become conscious in the way that you would be in your waking state, but while you are having a dream. And, it has this quality almost like of being in the holodeck in Star Trek or something like that, right? So you are aware of the fact that you're dreaming, but your sensory experience is, in many ways, very much like, almost exactly like what you would be experiencing while you're awake. And sometimes even more vivid. The main difference, of course, being is that because you're not getting, sensory input, which is, grounded by the regularities of nature, your imagination is also at play. So
you can fly.
Yeah, you can fly. Some of the consistencies that you would expect in a physical environment aren't going to be there. Like if you look at a clock, you might see the time, you look away, you look back at it, and it's different, right? So your brain isn't good at sustaining those kinds of patterns. In any case, I was completely fascinated by this and spent a lot of time exploring it. But I started to sort of do experiments in that state. So, I would wake up inside the dream, and then I would start almost like a physicist might. I would start testing out the parameters of the space that I was in. Seeing what, it's like, what was the gravity like? Where were the light sources? It's a bright day. Could I see the sun? And this one in particular, I had this very vivid one in which I woke up and found myself standing, I might have been in Ireland, something like that. It was this, perfect sunlit day, these rolling green hills. I was standing barefoot in the grass, seeing the dew sparkling. I could feel the wet grass under my feet. And I started to run through all of the facts that I knew about where I actually was. So I knew, it's like, what's my address? Where am I? I'm in my bedroom. I'm sleeping in the bed. And yet, so it's like being aware of all of those facts, and yet here I am standing in this field. And in this particular dream, I wanted to see if I could both perceive the space that I was in the dream, and also feel the bed. And I did. I could feel the pressure, as I kind of did, whatever it was, kind of extended the tendrils of my perceptual awareness, could kind of feel the pressure of the bed on my back, while still looking out over this grassy field.
Amazing that the memory of this, it's memories of dreams, mostly listening to other people's dreams can be a real downer or whatever.
Right.
But in this case, what's fascinating is that also that you have the memory that has remained, a very clear memory of it, which is okay. Keep going.
Yeah. Well, it was, there was something about this sort of the epiphanic realization. It made a very, very strong impression of simultaneously being in two places at once.
Oh, wow.
And then that just changed the way that I thought about reality afterwards, because it wasn't so clear, when I woke up the next day and went to work. It's like, well, how is this fundamentally different from the dream? Right? It permanently affected the way that I thought about consciousness. And so this comes into play in this particular image, insofar as you have what started off as, what I could see as my own reflection in the glass. And then in the same fashion as in that dream state of shifting the focal plane of attention to either, being in one space or being in the other.
Okay.
And I think the image shows this. So you have this peculiar, because we've got the pane of glass that is the railing. You've got the panes of glass that are, from on the sliding door on the windows. So we've got these four reflective surfaces. And if, on the right-hand side of the image, we see what is predominantly the man-made construction, right? That's where you see the house. Yeah. You can see the couch kind of inside the living room. But at the same time, there's a tree growing in front of the couch. On the right-hand side of on the left-hand side of the image, you see nature. So you can see the ocean, you can see the forest, you can see the mountains, you can see the sky and the sunlight. And yet there's a little bit of structure of, the human-made structure, which is also kind of, peering through the trees.
Right.
And kind of at the center of it all, is this figure which is both there and not there, right? It's sort of, you can sort of get the sense of this, a head-like structure in the middle. And to me, this is just kind of an exquisite symbol of what, kind of the illusory nature of the self.
Right.
And how it can shift back and forth. It's constantly, sort of shifting its perspectives and really deriving its sense of continuity from those transitions as opposed to it being anything that is solid.
Right. So here's what's interesting as well, is that because it is you who are there at that time making that image, you have a lot of anchors that you read that image in a way that reflects that time and that memory. So you're it reinforces, because you have the memory of the space and you have the memory of the smells, and you know what your head looks like in that shape. As somebody who hasn't been there, who doesn't have those anchors, I'm taking it on faith, the idea that you can see your head. It's, in a way, even that is one level outside. You know what I mean? Like it's not even accessible to me. And I can see, for somebody who is interested in like, as you're saying, in terms of, the realness of reality and the, perception of it, why an image like this would resonate and be meaningful. And I think I really would suggest that if, for example, in a previous, and it's quite interesting, a previous guest I had here, Lady Chisholm, she herself has been going into neuroscience as well. And she was also talking about what it is to perceive and to see. It's interesting that these are that I've gravitated to people who happen to be in this part of the world of thinking. It's quite interesting that I could connect your image here with what she sent and what she talked about. How much of this influences your everyday, teaching chemistry? How do you confuse your students?
I think it's just a regular through line there. It almost doesn't matter what I'm teaching, that, the notion of cultivating a kind of self-awareness that doesn't become imprisoned within excessive self-reflection. Mm-hmm. So, there's this notion of mirrors within mirrors. I think that, people can become trapped within their own thought processes. And in fact, thought seems to be predisposed to getting trapped within endless self-reflection.
Right.
And so, the question of what it's like to have a nervous system that is in an appropriate balance and orientation, both within itself and with others, with the external reality, so that it acts harmoniously and intelligently. That just operates in the background of, I think, whatever it is that is being communicated. So it's not, for me, so it's not just, it's like, okay, we'll learn about, maybe we'll talk about how to calculate pH today, but at the same time, we're learning about ourselves and our thought processes and the obstacles we might encounter.
Yeah, one of the things that I think about in terms of, because when you're thinking about chemistry, you're also you're thinking about the substance, but you're also thinking about the atomic behavior.
Right.
And when you start looking at the sort of atoms and the science of it, and you're just like, well, wait a second, what is matter even, let alone? Right. So I can totally see then trying to understand, well, how does consciousness exist within these matter systems? I could totally, and it ties in the philosophy and the psychology and everything. I can definitely connect with what you're saying.
Well, yeah, because chemistry is this central science. It's like we're talking about matter. Well, what is matter? Why do we define it as such? And I think to get oriented to that and to understand that in some fashion, all of this is, it's a construction of human enterprise. Like we're telling a story about what we think is happening in this physical world, but based on how we perceive it and how we measure it.
Yeah.
But we're not separate from that process. Right? Like although sometimes science gives you the sense of it, being something independent, it it absolutely is not.
Right. That is a perfect segue, oddly enough, that I will use, and please take it, to go to the next image, because basal dendrites. So is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So if you like what you've seen and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes, shooting it raw.